Okay, I was not deliberately trying to reference anything Oscar Wilde adjacent with my hair today. However, oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am a professional independent theatre critic here on social media, and this is my theatre-themed YouTube channel where I share reviews of the productions I have been invited to go and see. And today that means we are going to be talking all about The Picture of Dorian Gray. Based on the book of the same name by Oscar Wilde, this is an innovative and exciting new one-person production of the story that uses cutting-edge tech elements in order to facilitate one actor, in this case Succession star Sarah Snook, playing the many different roles in the narrative. The production has transferred from Australia, where it was originally conceived with a different performer, and it is now playing at the Theatre Royal Haymarket in London's West End. And it's fair to say that I had a lot of anticipation going into this show. Initially, when I first heard that this was announced, I did not know what to make of it. This is a, historically queer story, not necessarily ostensibly, but certainly in the themes and in the undertones. I mean, it's gay enough that it was instrumental in prosecuting Oscar Wilde for homosexuality. Literally, they were like, look at this really gay book you wrote. What's that about? And so for there to be a one-person production in which all of these roles are played by a woman, I didn't necessarily see what the vision was, but I leave it to that show to convince me and explain to me what it is, what's the reason for that? What was the motivation behind that choice? And then, as previews began to approach, I was getting inundated with comments on here, which I'm so grateful for, and messages and emails from various Australian theatre makers and theatre goers telling me what a remarkable piece of theatre this was and how excited they were that London audiences, and myself by extension, were going to have the chance to see it. Suddenly, I'm very intrigued. I love a recommendation. I love hearing the thoughts of discerning theatre fans like yourselves, so was deeply excited for this one, and today I'm going to be letting you know what I thought. And before we even get into it, I will be candid enough to tell you that I struggled with this one. Like, I don't want to sit here and suggest that I always have all of the answers and that I'm in the theatre going, yes, I know exactly what's wrong with this and how to fix it. Like, sometimes the curtain comes down at the end of a performance and you're thinking, did I enjoy that? And you'd have to continue interrogating it personally for a few days and formulating a response. And even now, as I sit here a few days later, I'm so torn between the different reactions I had to different elements of this show, and I hope to be able to articulate that for you today. In any case, I'm going to be bringing you my full review. If you enjoy this, make sure to subscribe here on YouTube, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my other upcoming West End theatre reviews. And most importantly, if you have had the chance to see The Picture of Dorian Gray, this particular production, either here in the West End or during its previous Australian life, let us know what you thought of it in the comments section down below, particularly if you disagree with what I have to say. For now though, let's talk about this incredibly unique production of The Picture of Dorian Gray. So, written by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray is about this titular character, a beautiful young man who is told towards the beginning of the story by the friend of his artist friend who is painting his portrait that his boyish good looks won't last forever. This relatably sent him into an absolute tailspin, and he unknowingly curses himself with eternal youth in exchange for his soul. The result being that he will look the same in perpetuity, and instead it's the painting that's just been completed which will age and show signs of not only his getting older, but also any moral corruption that he may encounter along the way, and you can be sure that he will, because apparently it's a lot easier to be a terrible person when you can rest easy in the knowledge that it isn't going to affect your skin. Dorian then goes about this hedonistic lifestyle. He is both welcomed and spurned in society. His actions have an occasionally deadly impact on those around him, and there are a great many moral conclusions that we can draw from this story, and without reviewing Wilde's work too much and criticizing him, because he is quite dead, it's one of those instances where the concept itself is perhaps a little bit stronger than the execution, but it remains well remembered among sort of late Victorian Gothic fiction. For sure, our boy Dorian Gray is up there with the Draculas and the Frankensteins, having what I can only assume is awkward afternoon tea. Which brings us to this version of the show, adapted and directed by Kip Williams. Now, this is not the first adaptation of The Picture of Dorian Gray, but it is, like I've said many times now, a particularly unique unique one because it has been conceived for one solo actor to play a great many roles, including but not limited to gorgeous Dorian Gray, Basil the painter, obnoxious Lord Henry Wotton, Sybil Vane, the needy actress, her brother James, Alan Campbell, who is basically everyone you've ever met at a party who clearly regrets being there, as well as a bevy of superfluous society dinner guests and drug-addled prostitutes. It's a beautiful story, it really is. But how does one performer play all of these roles, I hear you asking, tiny people in my camera? And the answer to that, funnily enough, is cameras. Because Sarah Snook, who stars in this production, is not strictly alone on stage. She is joined by the well-oiled machine of a tech team who are holding cameras and passing props and changing her costumes around her as live video feeds are capturing her performance, which is being redirected to multiple different screens across the stage. Screens which move, screens which she interacts with, screens which pull video not only from large high-definition cameras, but occasionally from smartphones that she holds in her hand while face-tuning images of her face and taking a selfie with the front row of the stalls. Think of this as the recent Jamie Lloyd revival of Sunset Boulevard, but on historically accurate opium. And I'm not sure I can even impart to you the precision and dexterity with which this entire operation has been choreographed, because Sarah performs most of the book, which seems to be just verbatim adapted into the play, but occasionally she will interact with pre-recorded versions of herself which are superimposed alongside her on those screens. Sometimes we see her in the flesh talking to someone on a screen, other times we see her captured on a screen with someone appearing over her shoulder. It's incredibly clever, all of the things that they managed to pull off in this show. But this is just the overview, and I'm getting dangerously close to actually reviewing the thing, so before I get any further, let me tell you what I actually thought. Now I'm definitely going to contradict myself, because contradictory were my feelings as I sat and watched this all unfolding. In an instant, I was both awestruck and baffled. I was thrilled and I was frustrated. I found myself looking at plenty of things, but seeing almost nothing. In this show that was full and empty all at once, a visual feast and yet a dissatisfying tease. And I say all of this because though this was hugely impressive, though, like I said, it was so carefully choreographed and gave us some beautiful imagery and was all technically awe-inspiring, it was sort of, particularly on occasion, but also throughout, quite emotionally inhibiting. For all that it took to relay live footage of Sarah Snook stood on a particular spot staring down the barrel of the camera, acting perfectly with 3 different versions of herself sharing the frame and emerging from behind her head, I don't know that that elicited much of an emotional response from me. And worse were the moments where this very technical framing device prevented us from having any kind of a human connection, because there were extended periods where Sarah Snook wasn't visible at all, either upstage and playing simply to cameras rather than playing to us, the audience, which was kind of this production's default, or offstage and obscured from view entirely. First though, let me tell you about the areas of this production I did find incredibly impressive, and when this was great, it was so great. One thing I particularly loved, the way that it grew and metamorphosized from the beginning, where we have Sarah surrounded by some of the technical team, passing her different props as she's narrating this opening scene, this conversation between Basil and Lord Henry prior to the arrival of Dorian Gray. I love the ways in which they subtly teach us about what the storytelling is going to be, the way that she characterizes them both with enough distinct differences and then stares down the barrel of the camera whenever delivering stage directions. The costuming at this point is reasonably pared back. It's just a buttoned shirt and a vibrant pair of palazzo pants. That will become much more elaborate over the course of the show. The use of cameras will become much more elaborate. If they were to throw all their tricks at you from the beginning, you would get bored of it. This is like an hour and 50 minutes without an interval, and what you're watching is basically a very gifted performer reading you a book from on stage. It's like story time, but for adults. How do we make that more exciting? We use technology. Something else I want to acknowledge is that the entire idea of utilizing screens and utilizing cameras in this production makes a lot of sense to me. I've spoken at length about this before when reviewing previous productions and when talking about Sunset Boulevard, that being a cinematic story as recalled by a screenwriter. Using a giant horizontal film screen made a lot of sense for that. I enjoyed less the recent revival of Evita at the Leicester Curve that used a vertical sort of portrait screen because it conveyed the idea of Eva Peron as an influencer, which I think was a little bit of a facile comparison. For this one, we have a variety of different screens that move around and don't necessarily have any specific connotation beyond just capturing the image of Dorian Gray. And we never specifically invoke the idea of one of those being the portrait, which I can't decide is a missed opportunity or the entire point, that the portrait ought to remain unseen and be this source of intrigue for us, the audience, though it becomes a little bit like Chekhov's portrait by the end. But certainly during this one moment of the play when Sarah Snook is performing and face-tuning and distorting a photo taken of her own face on a phone that she is holding that is beaming to this giant screen behind her head, we absolutely understand the metaphorical value of this theatrical framing device. And at its core, theatre is storytelling, and this is just a really smartly and beautifully embellished means of storytelling. And I would love it wholeheartedly and completely for its style and its gorgeousness and its impeccable technical skill if it weren't for the number of times that it comes between Sarah and the audience, because it's that human connection that we crave. We understand the issue at play here, we glimpse it by its contrast. When she comes out and speaks to us, and we can actually see the glimmer in her eye that we've already noticed on this giant high-definition screen, we feel a lot more than when she disappears off stage and we're essentially watching a film but in a theatre. At that point, I may as well be seeing the National Theatre live broadcast because I'd be sitting in more comfortable seats and I'd probably have snacks. Which feels like a good enough segue for me to expand on more of the issues that I had with this particular production. So if you were one of the people who thought that Sunset Boulevard played too much to screens, I have horrible news for you about this production, because the screens and the cameras in this do seem to be much more of a priority throughout than they were in Sunset Boulevard. And though they do far more technically impressive things with the screens here. I mean, they move around, and we have different green screen superimposed elements and filters and very clever work at play. What Jamie Lloyd's Sunset Boulevard had was these moments of engagement and these moments of emotional connectivity. There were no cameras and there was no screen when Nicole Scherzinger was belting out As If We Never Said Goodbye or With One Look. That was just a moment of connection between performer and audience. And that happens briefly towards the end of this, when Dorian Gray is terrified and maddeningly running through the woods with a hunting party and fearing for his life. We actually have tree set pieces that come down, and we've escaped from this sort of a digital world into something a lot more real. Dorian Gray has essentially gone outside and touched grass, to use internet speak. And maybe that's meant to be the interpretation of this moment, that this is Dorian trying to escape from the world he's created for himself. Maybe it's saying something about the digital world in which we all live and how to avoid vanity and moral corruption. I don't know, you can read into that for yourselves. However, that moment is conspicuous because we feel a lot more engaged with it than we have done for the previous perhaps hour and a half. This refreshment, however, is short-lived because the screens come back in so that we can do this Scooby-Doo style chase between Sarah Snook as Dorian Gray and a pre-recorded version of Sarah Snook as the man who is trying to kill Dorian Gray. Also, spoiler alert, sorry, it's a very old book. And dramatic as this may sound, it isn't even really the climax of this plot. When that moment happens, it's a scene between Dorian and his former friend, the artist Basil. It's once again a very clever technological feat in which Sarah as Dorian is live and Basil is superimposed in the foreground and Dorian is behind. But for much of this really climactic scene, Sarah steps into a set piece that then turns upstage and we only see her on the screen. This is maybe the most important moment for Dorian Gray's character development, and we're just watching it play out like a film. At which point I started to wonder whether what we were seeing was actually live or whether it was a red herring to allow for some sort of elaborate costume change and we were going to get a spectacular reveal. Now what does happen at the end of the scene is a little bit of a spoiler. If you don't want to know about it, you can skip ahead, but I'm going to tell you now because I think there are ways in which it could be improved. So what's happening here is that we are seeing Dorian Gray building up to actually stabbing his friend in the back and killing him after he has revealed that the portrait he once painted has now grown decrepit and sinister looking. It shows on its face all of the terrible atrocities that he has committed and retained his own youth and beauty. Basically, doing objectively evil stuff makes you look awful, which goes a long way towards explaining the current UK Conservative Party. Oh, I didn't even notice I was on a soapbox. Where did you come from? Now, this entire murderous act plays out on screen, and then the set piece spins around, and bathed in a beautiful magenta light, Sarah Snook lip syncs along to a blaring rendition of Gorgeous from the Apple Tree. You've probably heard the song even if you don't know where it's necessarily from. And, you know, that's a charming, campy moment. It's one of the parts of the show tonally that feels distinctly Australian to me, and that's meant with nothing but love whatsoever. It's very much sort of a Baz Luhrmann-esque kind of a thing where we're doing something gothic and bleak and serious, but also we have these campy and colourful and vibrant moments within it. Moulin Rouge does something similar, and it's the snap between killing with the knife and then lip-syncing along to I Am Gorgeous that reminds us of Dorian's key motivator here, and the vanity and the narcissism of all of it. However, I don't know if the audience are even able to really rationalise this being the same person. Bear in mind, every character in this play looks like Sarah Snook, so for us to draw a direct comparison between the Dorian we just saw killing someone and the Dorian we're now seeing delighting in their beauty a split second later, it would help for us to actually see that transition and not go from the one on the screen to the one we're now seeing over there. I think by switching that moment and switching our focus, it's unhelpful in the point that they're trying to make. What might be more impactful is if we were to go stabby, 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 lip sync, lip sync, lip sync. Should I direct? And this isn't the only scene that's played off stage. Later on, one of Dorian's lowest emotional moments, he finds himself in an opium den, kind of struggling and rushing around and being confronted by the shadows of his past, and we're seeing all of these different characters coming up to him and intimidating him, and this is all happening backstage or underneath the stage. Sarah Snook is off stage and only seen on screen throughout all of this. It's very heavily filtered and distorted, and all of these different characters are portrayed by Sarah Snook with a different filter on her face to make her look sort of crude and sinister and a little bit ghoulish. It has this sort of a grotesque quality, and impressive as it is, it's sort of too visually busy for us to really process the skill that Sarah Snook is deploying here, or really the value of the scene. There are some very clever moments where set pieces and cameras are used in conjunction to create some beautiful images. There's one moment where Dorian is traveling by car, and this was upstaged and it didn't really show us all of the tricks that they were using. I wish they had, but what I think was happening here was that they were filming Sarah Snook live through a pane of glass, and they had turned another screen that was brightly lit that had moving sort of city features so that they were reflected onto the glass, and then all of this is getting fed to a screen we're seeing in the front that is moving along at the speed of a car. All of which is incredibly elaborate and genius, but it's hiding a lot of their best work. They serve us another great visual later where Dorian is standing at this window and surrounded by flowers and nervously staring out while his tea guests entertain themselves and try and make conversation with him. But then halfway through this scene, Sarah Snook turns upstage, and we can still see her face on the screen, but she's turning away from us, the audience. Once again, we had that emotional connection and then it's gone. If that were to be staged in reverse with her then turning towards us, it might work a little better. So I've told you what I enjoyed about this production. I've told you the issues that I had with it. There is one more feature we have to talk about, and that is Sarah Snook herself. Now, this is a performance that is worthy of every single superlative that you could offer it. Though this sort of slightly artificial premise is a little bit limiting of our emotional connection, that does nothing to take away from the brilliant and layered and chameleonic performance that Sarah Snook is giving in this production. I have no idea if chameleonic is a word, but we're using it. And as well as being an absolute masterclass in storytelling, I already told you about the twinkle in the eye. There's something so magnetic about the way that she just delivers this establishing narration and dialogue. It is also a masterclass in characterization, whether live or pre-recorded. The way that she conjures up all of these different characters is just brilliant. But the most impressive quality of her performance for me is how emotionally engaged she is with this material. She is so present, she is so passionate, she is teary and wiping snot across her face and just so incredibly in it. There are moments where she stumbles and hesitates briefly over a word. It sort of happened between half a dozen and a dozen times, but it didn't feel like a clumsiness or a reluctance or a nervousness. It felt like a passion. It's when you are so incredibly in something that it's shaking as it's coming out of your mouth. Not only that, it's sort of unthinkable to me that she could be so skilled as to be that emotionally engaged with the material and yet retain the peace of mind to be standing on an exact spot so that she appears exactly where she does for the perspective of all of these different shots where she is sharing the frame with superimposed versions of herself, and they're only going to appear in one place. They can't move because they were already recorded some time ago. And she's actually participating in dialogue with herself, the timing of which leaves no room for error whatsoever because, again, it's pre-recorded. So to do something that has to be regimented to such a specific degree and yet to be able to make it feel fresh and organic and alive is mind-blowing. This is an acting masterclass happening right here with a technical masterclass unfolding and orbiting around it. And in hindsight, I think I might even be interested in going back to this production, writing off any kind of emotional investment I have in this story, and simply enjoying watching the choreography of all of these technical elements as they swarm around her. And swarm makes it sound very disorganized, but it's the antithesis of that. It is so militaristically choreographed. It's beautiful to watch. If you're someone who is interested in acting, go and watch Sarah Snook in this show. And if you're someone who is interested in the technical side of theatre, go and watch everything else that's happening on this stage. That is the work of company manager Graham Michael, stage manager Harriet Stewart, deputy stage manager Anna Hunscott, assistant stage managers Rose Diane, Ashwin Murray and Elizabeth Patrick, camera operators Lucy Parakina, Eli Rowrick and Benjamin Sheen, vision supervisor Sam Kara, vision mixer India Day, focus puller Flynn Melhop, vision swing Vicky Matranga, automation from Gary Kilby, head of sound Andy Hinton, deputy head of sound Hope Brennan, head of lighting Alex Walton, technical swing Sean DuPont, of course the tech team also needs swings, Jennifer Allen, head of wardrobe, Nick Einaud, head of wigs, hair and makeup, wardrobe and wig swing Hayley Hill, and Victoria Marshall, who is a dresser. Not to mention the creative team who designed all of these elements in the first place. That's David Bergman's video design, Marge Horwell's scenic and costume design, John Lyle and Dan Light, who were associate video designers, Nick Schleeper, who was the lighting designer, and Clements Williams, who was the composer and sound designer. We hear often that it takes a small army of people to bring these shows to the stage, and that's just one aspect of this production that I've told you about and all of the people responsible for it. It's particularly easy to see what that looks like in this show when they allow all of those technical elements to come to the forefront of the stage rather than keeping in the wings. But those have been my somewhat challenging thoughts on this production of The Picture of Dorian Gray. I think there is so much to love here, and I think, confusingly, this might have been a 5-star review if it was simply Sarah Snook alone on stage telling this story and reading this book, because she's such an engaging, dynamic, thrilling performer. But would I have left that production calling it just another one-person show that was a little bit traditional and old-fashioned and not pushing theatrical storytelling forward? Yes, I probably would have. And so instead they're doing something innovative, they're doing something cutting edge, they're doing something undeniably exciting. It doesn't work for me consistently, but you take the big swings in order to achieve big reward. And there are some stunning moments here. This is a great production to learn a great many things from. This is going to have a huge industry-wide impact, I feel, because cameras on stage are not new, they are here to stay, and this may be, in fact it is, some of the most profoundly artistic use of them I've ever seen. A little too reliant perhaps, but a huge amount of creative food for thought. And so balancing this tour de force solo performance, this breathtaking technical undertaking, and the challenges to emotionally connect to the story behind this screen, it's a 4-star review from me for The Picture of Dorian Gray at the Theatre Royal Haymarket. But, as always, I am deeply curious to hear what you all thought of this production. Have you seen The Picture of Dorian Gray yet in London? Did you see it in Australia? What did you think? How does it compare to other one-person shows you may have seen recently? How does it compare to other uses of cameras and screens on stage? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you have enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews coming very soon about all of your favourite shows. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!